What's going on YouTube? Today we have a 27-minute video on episode 22 of the U.S.S. Enterprise D tutorial, and got a couple of things we're going to be working on today. We're going to be picking up where we left off in the backbone of our lower hull, and then we're actually going to work on the outline of the pylons. So let's get started, and let's see how much we can get done today. Now, really just going to be trying to wrap up the back end of this area where the torpedo bay is going to go, and then we're really going to be focusing on the outline of the pylons. Now you can see here as I'm continuing on this pattern right here, as I'm trying to get this all to blend in just a little bit better maybe. I'm thinking what I can do is I can stretch some of this out a little bit so it won't look so bad. Not that it necessarily looks bad, it really doesn't, but I think stretching it out a little bit, we can get away with it. You can see I'm going with my cut line. It's this way, not making any mistakes. To have something that looks just like this. So really we just extended this part going down here with the same pattern that we had going forward. So this way, rather than it just going, I think up until this point being one down with a cut, now we continued on that pattern of two. So that's really all we did. Before we get too far, let's do our half slabs there. So far, so good. Yeah, because one of the reasons I was doing this too is because this middle backbone here, it's really going to, it was getting too broad. So that's why I'm stretched out the sides here, so this way it kind of maintains the current shape of it, if that makes sense. Now we're just literally winding, making this back part wider just by one each. We have to do the undersides. Alright, we're in good shape. Now, if I'm not mistaken, we are going to make this back area just a little bit thicker than it currently is, so don't worry about this piece hanging off the back. We are going to work on this a little bit more than where it's at right now. Because the pylon itself, when you think about it, well, the two pylons, they're technically one piece that kind of wraps around this lower hull here. So we are ultimately going to have to make something to go around this that connects with the two pylons that we're going to be building. Again, now we're just going with the cut line with the half slabs, and that's looking pretty good so far. See, it's really maintaining that shape as opposed to where we had it before. It wasn't, it was getting way too wide. This is going to work out just fine, I think. See, just going with the cut. That looks pretty good. That looks pretty damn good. Heck of a lot better than how it looks from when we started. This is what I wanted right here, because now this shape is maintained going all the way up the backbone. So that was the whole point of stretching out these last couple of rows, to maintain that shape going down. It's not perfect. We still have to make some tweaks to it to accommodate for the torpedo, the rear torpedo that we're going to be adding. But right now we're not necessarily worrying about those little details. Really our main concern is the shape of the ship. And then after we're done with that, then we can go back in, we can add in all these little details here and there. the sides here. Alright. So far, so good. I think the only thing I might want to do is maybe do like a row of half slabs going along the lip here. Make it blend in just a little bit more. We're definitely making some progress with this. In just a moment, we're going to be whizzing over and starting our pylons. I always have to think about that because I always get them confused between the pylons and the nacelles. And it's got the funniest thing on how I remember that. I always think of the Star Trek Into Darkness when Scotty's talking about the Enterprise, and he says, "Oh yeah, I'd love to get my hands on those fine ample nacelles." And I always think like, okay, he's talking about the engines, and it's the silliest thing in the world, but that's how I remember it. Now, see that row of half slabs going there? That doesn't look terrible, but also doesn't look great either. It doesn't have a clean cut line, which is what I don't like about it, and that's why I'm going back and I'm getting rid of it. Looking at it from every angle, she's definitely looking just like the Enterprise D as far as the lower hull goes, which is exactly what we want. Just minus the pylons. And before you know it, and it's probably going to go by quick where we get the majority of this outside done, and you guys will be caught right up with me when I'm doing. So I really got to get a move on with my interior, and I am getting a lot done. Now I zoomed out and I'm going to go back out again so you guys can pick that up with me, because there's a reason why I'm putting that block where I am. So you can see here that I'm going off of, from the backbone here, not the first cut, the second cut right here. This is our placement rather than cutting back, or rather than counting back. So this is where we're going to put a blue block. That's going to be a builder block. And right off that line, right here, we're going to start our pylons from the sides and the front. Let's do the same thing on this side. Okay. So those blue blocks are obviously not going to stay there. I have those as markers for not only myself, but for you all building this ship with me, so you have this available to you, because obviously I'm not counting back. I just went up in there, went off the cut line. But when I did this, as you can see, I obviously didn't count back, and I just eyed it. And that's really the best thing to go about it, is that when you're building your ship, unless you have the exact build as I do, building this with me, then you're in good shape. And you just have to go off that second cut line. If you're not, well, at that point, I'd just recommend looking at your go on Google and search 3D U.S.S. Enterprise D, and look at it from different shapes, and just try to match it up to the best point that you possibly can. And this is something that I really have tried to teach when I'm building these ships, because sometimes I'll get people ask me the exact dimensions of them, and I'll basically try to explain it in a way where I don't have to do that. And not that I don't want to help people in getting the exact dimensions, I do. At the same time, I'm trying to show you how I build, because this is ultimately one of the reasons why everybody's tuning in, because they want to see how I'm building this ship. And I'm hoping that by doing these tutorials that I teach people a thing or two in doing them. And this is exactly how I do it. I just eye it, and I look at what I've done, and I go back to the source material, in this case a 3D model on the computer, and I look at it from different angles and see if it matches up. If it doesn't match up, then I make changes and changes until it gets to where I want it to look. Now you can see that we're doing a lip here just behind our two builder lines on the left and right, too thick, because this is ultimately where pylons are going to be wrapping around this whole back piece. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think the first time I threw these down, I think I made them just a little bit too thick. So it is going to be a slight adjustment that we're going to make as far as the thickness of them goes, because I think I did make them just a little bit too thick my first go around. But we'll get it where it needs to be. All right. So we got a pretty good marker there for where they're going to start. What I actually want to do is hop over and look at my serratos and see the patterning that I used to do these pylons that connect the lower hull to the engine, to the engines. And what I'm just looking at here is the cut pattern, because I was thinking like maybe I could use something kind of like this, because the Enterprise D pylons, they do kind of slope in this direction a little bit. But in reverse, where the swoop would go into the ship itself, where the straight part would go into the actual engine. And that's pattern of 4. Easy enough. So I'm just double checking my patterns, and those are 3. Okay. Think we got it. Let's go back over to the Enterprise D and see if we can do this. This is one of the things I've talked about. You know, I try to recycle my patterns when I feel it makes sense. Because even if I don't necessarily use this exactly, this pattern that I'm pulling from the serratos might ultimately lead me to where I need to fall on, which basically is what happened. It was a combination of that and using the 3D model as a reference material, looking at what I did, seeing, okay, does this match how the Enterprise D looks? If it does, let's move on. We'll do the backside. If it doesn't, let's keep tweaking it until it gets where we want it to be. This is completely the secret behind shipbuilding, just trying different things out, seeing how it looks, and if it doesn't look right, do it again until it comes out exactly the way you want it to. We are going to be spending just a little bit of time on this today. Really only going to have enough time to get the outline of the pylons done, and it won't even be all of them because it's took just a little bit to get them where they needed to be. But hopefully between today's episode and tomorrow's episode, we'll have the full outline of them completed, but at the same time not rushing it. We're just going to see how far we can get in the time that I have to do it in. Because yesterday's episode was a little long. I really don't like to go out that far unless I absolutely have to. And I really just wanted to get the base for the outside of the ship done so I can move on to this point of it. Because I believe that went out to 9 or 10 parts just to build the lower hull. So I mean, there are quite a few different steps involved in getting that done. But it was definitely worth it, and the episode's doing pretty well. And everybody that's taken the time to watch that episode and my other episodes, just want to thank everybody again for checking that out. You guys are awesome. But no, this build has been a blast, but Enterprise D has its own challenges just like any other ship. And that's the best way I can describe it when I build these things. I just mess with it until it comes out the way I want it to. And trying different patterns that you've used in the past and seeing what works and seeing what doesn't work. You see, I'm just gradually doing a little on one side, I'm hopping over to the other side. I'm making sure whatever I do on one side, I'm repeating that same process on the other side. I'm not going too far out, and I'm doing this to stop myself from making any kinds of mistakes. Now, I don't necessarily like how that's curving. It's not really swooping the way it's supposed to. if I take one off each side, maybe go forward a little bit more. I don't know. We're going to have to mess with this until we get it where it needs to be. So we remove 2 off each side. And now I'm just kind of whizzing around, checking it out, looking at my 3D reference and seeing if it matches. Now again, it is slightly, ever so slightly forward. I need to bring it back probably at least one more cut, but we're going to do that later on. Right now, we're just worried about the shape of how the pylons are going, and then we'll come back again and we'll adjust the correct length of them once we had the backside built, because that's going to be another thing too. We really have to build the outline for the front and then the back before we can determine, okay, do I need to make any adjustments? Now, yeah, you could maybe possibly do this without doing the back end, but one of the reasons I like to do both is because it'll give you a sense of proportion and being able to gauge not only the front but then the back and seeing how much space is in between it and then comparing that to the 3D model, which I feel was really important when we're building a ship like this. Now you can get kind of a little bit more of an idea on the things that I look at when I'm building my ships. Because it really, it does help in so many ways. This is one of the reasons too why my ships are in proportion with themselves and they don't look distorted. It's because I take my time and I build out key areas that I feel that are the most important to help not only get the shape that you want, but the correct proportions section to section. Because that can be very challenging, especially as you start building bigger. We're going to have a small problem with that when we're working on the Enterprise D, because I believe I had to rebuild the engines one time and then stretch them out after the rebuild. Because the first time I made them, they were too close together. So I just decided to delete them and do them again. And then the second time I came back and did them, they were correct distance apart, but they were just a little bit too short, so I had to make them a little bit longer. But having this attention to detail really separates the men and women from the boys and girls in a lot of ways, because like I said, I'm not one of those people that when I build something, I just throw it down, and if it is what it is. No, the OCD is going to kick in until I fix it. That's just kind of how I am. And it's going to be no different with this build. And if it takes 150 episodes to get it right, then it takes 150. If we could do it in less, hey, that would be cool. But at the same time, I'm not trying to limit myself to how many episodes it's going to end up being. So you can see I'm trying something out here. I did one row here going up to the first cut line forward because I'm trying to create like an angle here. But as you can see, I'm not necessarily happy with how this is turning out. Now this was pretty close, this pattern here, from what we did from the Cerratos. It was worth trying, but ultimately, as you can see, we're not really going to be able to use it. So everything after this first cut, we're going to get rid of this off both sides. I mean, unless you're really happy with it, you could leave it, but I wouldn't recommend it, because then going forward, all the changes that I make, as far as where the pylons go, you're kind of going to be lost on that. So try to stick with what we're doing. As always, I need to get a point in putting this disclaimer out there. I'd pan through the videos first before you start building, just in case I do decide to make any changes, if you don't want to go through the deleting process with me. But this is one of the things that I definitely want to do with my builds, is show the mistakes that I make, because it's within these mistakes where we learn. And these mistakes can show you things as far as maybe what not to do again. Now that doesn't look too bad there. May need to do one more block there right on the last row where before it meets the hull on the side of the lower hull. But that's more or less kind of what we're going for. Like it goes like a swoop in and out, more or less. You can see, obviously, I'm not doing the underside, adding an additional row because I haven't committed to it just yet. This is just a mock to see if we're happy with it. One of the nice things, though, is that this is going to be the hardest part about it because when we do the backside, it'll be easier because we're essentially just going to be copying the same pattern that we have up here. So that's one of the reasons why we're taking the time to build this out correctly, because then we're going to use this same pattern again for the backside of the pylons. Now, I was doing this, I don't necessarily remember why I went one for, oh, there we go. That's why, because we're moving it back by one. So now we're just one behind the blue line. Let's do the same thing on this right side now. Need to get rid of this underside access because we're removing this back by one. Remember, make sure you're only building on the cut lines. This way you don't make any mistakes when you delete the row in front of it, and you'll be in good shape. Yeah, see, that's what I was talking about doing before, just having that one block moving it forward. Kind of just give it just a little bit more of a curve. And we do the same thing on this left side because that didn't look too bad. Let's see how it looks. We'll make the change. And if it doesn't look great, we could always go back to what we had. That's kind of what I'm talking about, that swoosh in and out. What I might end up doing is this block that's the furthest back on both sides, I might move that forward. So it's not so harsh the curve, and it's a little bit more subtle. That's not looking too bad. And you can see what I did there. More or less, kind of what I said. We're just going to be moving down these last two rows. So this way, this second to last row intersects with that one that's the furthest back. So it kind of stretches that out a little bit. So that's more of what we want right there. That's starting to look like the Enterprise D right there. That curve right there. That's pretty spot on. Then you can see the process and how I do these things. Really wish there was a better way to describe it other than just trying stuff out and see what works and seeing what doesn't work. So I'm just going to go subtle and gingerly as far as adding our rows to each side. I'm just going to do one at a time and seeing how it looks. I definitely think that front curve, that's where we want to be. That is right where we want to be. Because these pylons here, they're not super big because they don't come out that far on the Enterprise D. Definitely not the length of the saucer. It's probably about there's probably about a quarter saucer off the sides of the engine still going outward. So they almost feel like they're very tucked in, but we have to make them long enough so that when we're looking at the ship from the front, as we zoom out, we can still see them. That's going to be another thing too. So now what I'm doing here is off the first individual, as we go 3, 3, 2, 2, and then 1. Off the first row of singles here, we're going to do a builder block on each side. This is where we're going to start our backside. Okay. Then we're just going to try to build this out. May not be the identical to it, but it's going to be pretty close. And we're also going to have to, like I said, we're going to be making some adjustments to it. Let's see how that looks. Not looking too bad. Problem that we're having though is that this back piece here is really mostly going to be kind of flat. But for right now, we're just going to build out this piece so we can still get that curve going. And then we can always make another pass and flatten out this back area here and make it look a little bit more how the Enterprise D looks back here. So if you're noticing that too and you're like, well, that's kind of not how the Enterprise D looks, don't worry about that. Right now, we're just literally focusing on the two individual shapes of the pylons for the left and right, and then we'll worry about blending everything in later on. So I'm going to count this out. All right, let's do the same thing on this side. We're building it off the pre-existing last row that we had. So I might want to make sure that that more or less matches this. So far, so good. Like I said, it feels a little bit thick, but we'll adjust that too. Right now, we just need to get that shape right. Because this is very important, because this mock that we have right now is really giving us a great deal of information. It's going to show us what we need to do, but we can still use this pattern that we're making right now. We can just either move it forward or we can move it backwards. You can see I'm making a builder line here. I'm bringing this back because I basically need to know how far back I need to go before these two sides meet up. You see I'm just eyeing it, making sure that matches with this row here. I did that off the point that's furthest back. The one to the right, just brought that all the way back here, then connected the two. So now we're going to do the same thing on this side, on this one right here. We're going to bring this back. Oh, got a little bit more to bring it back. I went a little bit too far there. Now we're going to bring this all the way over. There we go. Now we're in good shape. Got a couple more rows to do right here. And then one more. Okay. Doesn't seem like we've gotten that much done, but coming up with patterns can take some time, as you can see. And when you take the time to develop these patterns that looks closest to the shape, you're going to be making smaller changes, as opposed to where if we just kind of threw something down, not only would we be adjusting the thickness of this, but we would be constantly reworking the shape of it. While right now it's not perfect, we're going to have, like I said, we're going to kind of blend in this back area here, because on the back side it's a little bit more flat, but we'll get there. This part nonetheless is very pivotal for what we're going to be using for. This is again wireframing 101, and pretty happy with the progress that we've made thus far. She's definitely really starting to come together and finally really starting to take shape. There's only once we get the pylons done, then we just got to get the nacelles, aka the engines, completed, and then more or less the outside of the ship will be done, with an exception of filling in the lower and upper sides of the saucer section. Which, as you can see, we've taken a break from that because it's just it's a lot of steps to go through to get this all the way filled in, but we are going to get there. But anyway, I think that's going to wrap us up today. I just want to thank everybody again for tuning in today's episode. And if you did enjoy this content, help me out. Hit that like and subscribe button, helping me in supporting the channel. I can't thank you enough for that. And new subscribers, don't forget to hit notifications on so you get notified when those new videos drop. And speaking of new videos, don't forget you can catch my Minecraft videos dropping Tuesdays through Thursdays. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for me. Just want to thank you all again for tuning in today's episode. I hope everybody has a happy and safe week, and I'll catch you on the next episode.